They say trust is the foundation of a marriage. But at 33, I've learned that foundations are the first things to rot when you aren't looking. My name is Matthew.
I'm 33, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I was living the suburban dream in Chicago. I've spent the last decade building a career in architectural logistics. I'm a guy who notices when a structure is a fraction of an inch off. I never thought the foundation of my own life was the thing that was rotting. It was a Tuesday afternoon at Saks on Michigan Avenue. The kind of place where the air smells like expensive leather and old money. Sarah was picking out a $3,000 cashmere wrap for her leadership retreat in Aspen. I was just the guy holding the credit card, leaning against a marble pillar, checking my watch. Everything felt calibrated, safe, and utterly boring. That's when he approached me. An older guy, late 60s, wearing a blazer that had seen better days, but a security badge that was polished to a mirror shine. He didn't look like a mall cop. He looked like a retired detective who'd spent 30 years seeing people at their absolute worst. "Mr. Miller," he whispered. His voice was like gravel under a tire. "Step into the security suite with me. We have a discrepancy on the floor." I thought it was a credit card glitch or a shoplifting misunderstanding. I followed him into a cramped back room filled with the blue glow of 20 monitors. He didn't say a word. He just pointed a calloused finger at Corridor B. The restricted hallway behind the luxury dressing rooms. There she was, Sarah, my wife of 8 years, the woman I thought I knew down to her DNA. She wasn't trying on clothes. She was pressed against the mahogany paneling, her head tilted back, laughing into her iPhone. It wasn't her work laugh, it was that low, melodic hum she used to save only for me, the one from our honeymoon in Maui, before the late nights at the office became her new religion. She was twirling a lock of hair, her eyes bright with a predatory glow. I couldn't hear the words through the screen, but I didn't need to. Her body language was a signed confession. She looked more alive talking to a ghost on a screen than she had looking at me across the dinner table for the last 3 years. The guard looked at me with a pity that burned worse than the betrayal. "I've been watching the feeds for 20 years, son," he said quietly. "The eyes never lie. You needed to see this before you signed that receipt." I stared at the monitor for exactly 10 seconds. My heart didn't race. It went ice cold. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man looking at a structural failure in real time. In my world, when a beam cracks, you don't stand under it and scream. You step back, evaluate the load-bearing points, and stabilize the site before the whole floor drops. I walked out of that security room with the steady gait of a man who just confirmed a blueprint error. My pulse was a flat line. When I found Sarah back at the coat rack, she was tucking her phone into her designer clutch with a practiced, fluid motion. She looked radiant, that post-adrenaline glow you only get from a secret. "Found the perfect one, Matt," she said, her voice like honey. "It'll be perfect for those chilly Aspen evenings." I didn't flinch. I reached out, tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear, and kissed her forehead. It felt like kissing a marble statue. "It looks great on you, Sarah," I said. My voice was calm, professional. The same tone I use when a contractor tells me a project is $50,000 over budget. I handed over my Sapphire Reserve card, signed the digital screen, and took the heavy shopping bags. We walked out of Saks into the biting Chicago wind. The gray sky over Michigan Avenue looked like a premonition. As I tossed the bags into the back of our black Audi Q8, her phone chimed. She didn't even hesitate. The realtor again," she sighed, rolling her eyes with such perfect frustration. I almost admired the performance. "The buyers for the lakefront property are being difficult. I need to handle this before we even leave the lot. Give me 2 minutes." I watched her through the tinted windshield as I sat in the driver's seat. She wasn't talking to a realtor. Her thumb was flying across the screen, a small, private smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, a smile that wasn't for the man who just paid for her $3,000 business wardrobe when she finally hopped in. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and Betrayal. "All set," she chirped, leaning over to squeeze my hand. "God, I don't know what I'd do without you keeping me grounded, Matt." I gripped the leather steering wheel, shifted into drive, and pulled out into the swarm of city traffic. "No problem, Sarah," I said, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Everything's under control." Inside, I was already drawing the grid. I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was a forensic auditor of my own life. The Sarah I loved had died in that security room 10 minutes ago. This woman in my passenger seat, she was just a high-risk liability I needed to liquidate. The timer wasn't just ticking, it was counting down to 0. Adultery in the digital age is just a series of data points.
And I've spent my entire career turning data into leverage at 33.
I'm in that sweet spot of the American workforce. I'm old enough to have seen the world before it was fully synced, but young enough to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, is ever truly deleted. If Sarah thought a 4-digit passcode on her MacBook was going to stop me, she'd forgotten who she married. I turned our Lincoln Park brownstone into an observation post.
For 48 hours, I became a ghost in my own home.
I watched the extra pilot's classes that never left her skin with a drop of sweat. I watched her tilt her phone screen away at dinner like it was a classified document.
And then there was the smell of sharp, woody scent of food that lingered in her hair when she came home. A fragrance that cost more than my first car and definitely wasn't in my cabinet. But I didn't need a nose.
I needed proof. I made one call. JX.
We'd worked together back in my tech consulting days before I pivoted to architecture. He's the kind of guy who lives on caffeine and encrypted service, the kind of guy who can find a needle in a digital haystack and then tell you who dropped it. I need the ghosts, JX, I said.
Everything on the iCloud, the burner apps, the deleted cache.
I want her entire digital footprint since New Year's.
Give me 48 hours, Matt, he replied, and maybe a bottle of that Japanese whiskey you keep in your study. 2 days later, a link appeared in my inbox.
It was a digital autopsy of my marriage.
JX hadn't just found texts.
He'd reconstructed a parallel universe. I sat in my home office at 2 o'clock a.m., the blue light of the monitor reflecting of my wedding ring. There were the GPS logs from her pilot's studio, except they showed her parked at a luxury high-rise in the West Loop for 3 hours every Tuesday.
There were the deleted photos from a weekend. She claimed she was at a corporate retreat in Boston. Instead, she was in a beachfront Airbnb in Malibu, posing in a bikini I'd never seen. But the ghosts that haunted me most were the voice notes. Hearing her voice, that soft, intimate tone she used to use for our future plans, whispering to another man about how easy I was to manage.
How I was too busy with blueprints and beams to notice the house was on fire. I closed the laptop.
My hands weren't shaking. In my mind, I was already drafting the demolition plan. I've always been a numbers guy.
In architectural logistics, if the ledger doesn't balance, the building doesn't rise. So, I pulled 5 years of bank statements and ran them through a forensic accounting script.
That's when the affair transitioned from a betrayal of the heart to a federal-grade heist. IT started small to $100 here. 500 they're labeled as Home Depot or Target runs.
But over the last 18 months, the leaks had turned into a flood.
Large, round sums were being wired out of our joint high-yield savings account, the $150,000 future fund we built for a custom-built home in Barrington.
The place where we were supposed to raise the kids we'd been talking about since our late 20s, the destination for all that cash.
A Nevada-registered shell company called Evergreen Solutions LLC. I pulled the public records for the LLC. It didn't take a genius to spot the signature. The registered agent was a dummy firm, but the primary contact email was a masked address that JX traced back to a private server. The initials of the company weren't random. EVV, Eric Vance. He was a senior consultant at her firm, a guy I'd shaken hands with at the last Christmas party.
He'd looked me in the eye while sipping my expensive scotch, knowing he was currently living off the interest of my savings. Sarah wasn't just looking for an escape. She was building a golden parachute.
Every time we went out to dinner, and she talked about our future, she was mentally calculating how much more she could siphon off before the well ran dry. She was treating our marriage like a distressed asset she was stripping for parts. I sat in my darkened office, looking at a spreadsheet that showed exactly how much my partnership was worth to her. To Sarah, I wasn't a husband.
I was a 0% interest loan for her new life with Eric. The realization didn't make me want to cry. It made me want to litigate. I didn't just want her out of my house.
I wanted every cent of that evergreen money back, with interest. I didn't go to a neighborhood lawyer with a storefront office.
I went to the 44th floor of a skyscraper in the Loop.
To a firm that specializes in high-asset dissolution. My attorney, Marcus Thorne,
was a man who spoke in billable minutes and had a handshake like a vice.
We sat in a glass-walled office that seemed to float over Lake Michigan.
The water below was grey and unforgiving, just like my mood. She's clever, Marcus said, looking over the Evergreen Solutions files. But she's playing checkers.
We're going to play 3D chess. We moved with surgical precision. Most people don't read the fine print of their mortgage agreements, but I'm a logistics guy.
When we bought our brownstone, my parents had fronted 60% of the capital as a family investment. I'd insisted on a capital protection clause back then, not because I didn't trust Sarah, but because I'm an analyst. It's what I do. That clause was now the noose, because the initial capital was family source and the mortgage had a specific performance rider. I was able to trigger an emergency freeze on our home's equity.
Sarah couldn't leverage the house, she couldn't take out a second mortgage, and she couldn't sell her half to fund Eric's next venture. Next, we moved the liquid assets.
I didn't just hide the money, that's illegal.
I moved our primary holdings into irrevocable family trusts with my sister as the CEO trustee.
Citing the suspicious transfers to Evergreen Solutions as evidence of dissipation of marital assets in the eyes of the law, I wasn't hiding money. I was protecting it from a fraudulent actor. By the time Wednesday morning rolled around, the sun was shining over Chicago, but for Sarah, the climate had changed. She woke up in a house she no longer had a claim to, using a credit card that was one swipe away from a declined message, and checking a bank account that was effectively a frozen lake. She was still humming in the shower, planning her Aspen trip with Eric, completely unaware that I had already dismantled the floor she was standing on. She thought she was the one with the secret.
She had no idea she was already a tenant at will in my life. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one screaming. It's the one who's been taking notes while you thought you were winning. I didn't confront her in our bedroom. I didn't want the drama of a suburban shouting match. I wanted a professional execution. I rented a high-end conference suite in a Fulton Market CEO working space, all exposed brick, industrial lighting, and cold, hard surfaces.
I told Sarah I'd landed a massive commercial lead and needed her marketing eye for a pitch with a potential partner.
I told her to bring Eric Vance. Since his firm handled the logistics for Evergreen, they arrived together, radiating the kind of smug confidence you only see in people who think they've committed the perfect crime.
Eric was wearing a slim-fit blazer and a $1,000 smile.
Sarah looked like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes.
They looked like a power couple.
They looked like they already owned the room. Matthew, thanks for including us, Eric said, extending a hand. I didn't take it.
I just gestured toward the mahogany table.
Have a seat.
Let's get right to the specs. They sat, exchanging a quick, knowing glance that was meant to be subtle, but felt like a slap.
I didn't open a PowerPoint.
I didn't show them blueprints. I simply slid a thick, heavy manila envelope across the polished wood. It landed between them with a solid thud. What's this?
Sarah asked, her voice tilting toward a laugh. The contract. Read it, I said.
My voice was as flat as a desert floor. Sarah opened it first. The top page was the surveillance still from the Gold Coast store, her laughing against the wall.
Beneath that, the high-res photos from their Malibu retreat. Then came the bank statements, highlighted in neon yellow, showing every dollar wired to Evergreen Solutions.
Finally, the incorporation papers for the LLC with Eric's signature on the line. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the lungs. I watched the color leave Eric's face in waves, moving from a healthy tan to a sickly, gray-green hue.
He looked like a deer caught not just in the headlights, but in the crosshairs. Sarah's hands started to shake, the paper rattling against the table. She opened her mouth to speak, to spin, to lie, to explain, but no sound came out. This is the project, Eric, I said, leaning back.
It's a demolition.
And you're both standing in the blast zone. I'd spent $20,000 on legal fees and private investigators just to set up this 10-minute meeting.
As I watched Eric fumble with his tie, unable to even look me in the eye, I realized it was the most expensive satisfaction I'd ever bought, and it was worth every damn cent. Elena landed at O'Hare at 8:00 p.m., carrying a Chewy briefcase and enough cold fury to freeze the tarmac.
She's a senior partner at a white shoe firm in Manhattan.
To most people, she's a corporate litigator. To me, she's the person you call when you want to ensure the enemy never sees the sun again. She walked into my kitchen, skipped a hug, and went straight for the Evergreen files I had spread across the island. Matthew, she said,
her eyes scanning the data with the speed of an algorithm.
She didn't just cheat. She committed industrial-scale embezzlement of marital assets.
Stop looking at this like a broken heart. Start looking at it like a hostile takeover. Elena doesn't do tea and sympathy. She spent the next 6 hours drafting separation papers that were so legally airtight they felt like a vacuum seal.
But she knew the Chicago social scene as well as I did. Sarah was a master of the victim spin. She was likely already drafting a narrative about my emotional distance or Workaholism to save face with our circle in Lincoln Park and the North.
Sure, we aren't letting her set the tone.
Elena said, clicking her pen.
In the age of information, the person who speaks first with the most receipts wins. We didn't post on social media. We didn't send a mass email.
We went old school and undeniable. Elena helped me compile the dossier, a curated set of the financial transfers and the Aspen itinerary, and we sent it via certified mail to our closest friends, family, and the board members of the charity Sarah chaired. The cover letter was a masterpiece of legal neutral speak. Due to the discovery of significant financial misconduct and the redirection of family funds to Evergreen Solutions LLC, Matthew and Sarah are separating.
We asked for privacy during this time of asset recovery. By the time Sarah got back to her sister's place that night, trying to type out her "we're hitting a rough patch" text to her bridesmaids,
her phone was already blowing up with notifications.
The truth had arrived in a manila envelope before she could even craft her first lie. Elena looked at me, closed her laptop, and finally poured a glass of wine.
The perimeter is secure, Matt.
Now, let's talk about her job. Sarah's career was her identity. She was a rising star at a global pharmaceutical giant based in Deerfield, a company that practically wrote the book on corporate ethics and compliance. In that world,
your reputation isn't just a social asset, it's a legal requirement. While she was busy trying to find a lawyer who could pierce Elena's legal armor, I was looking at the corporate travel card statements JX had pulled from her browser cache. It was a goldmine of arrogance. She hadn't just been stealing from our house.
She'd been stealing from her shareholders, the boutique hotel weekends in Charleston, billed as market research seminars, the 5-star dinners with Eric at Elena,
filed as key opinion leader engagement. She'd even used the company card for the deposit on the Aspen rental, claiming it was a strategy retreat for her department. I didn't call her boss to scream.
I didn't send an anonymous tip. I did exactly what any responsible citizen or concerned spouse would do.
I drafted a formal letter to their chief compliance officer. I attached the itemized receipts, the GPS logs that didn't match her expense reports,
and the Evergreen Solutions filing that linked her to a direct competitor's consultant. It's not a vendetta.
Matt, Elena said as she watched me hit send on the encrypted file.
It's a corrective action. Monday morning in the corporate world is usually about coffee and status updates.
For Sarah, it was the end of the line. At 9:15 a.m., while I was sitting in a quiet CF in Wicker Park, I got a text from a former colleague of hers. Did you hear? Security just walked Sarah out.
They didn't even let her clear her desk. HR looked like they were ready for war. She had gambled her 6-figure salary, her stock options, and her professional legacy on the belief that I was too loyal to look at the numbers. She thought my love was a blindfold. It wasn't.
It was a spotlight, and when I finally turned it on,
there was nowhere left for her to hide. Elena has this look. She gets a narrowing of the eyes that usually precedes a multi-million-dollar settlement.
She'd stayed up until 3:00 a.m. digging through the PACER database and unsealing records that had been buried under layers of legal non-disclosure. Matt, she said, sliding a tablet across the kitchen island.
Your wife didn't find a soulmate.
She found a professional.
The file was a suppressed civil complaint from 5 years ago out of King County, Washington. Seattle.
A different woman, a different city, but the exact same blueprint.
The plaintiff, a high-level executive at a tech firm, had accused Eric Vance of systematic financial coercion.
He had convinced her to invest her entire $401,000 into a shell company coincidentally named Pacific Horizon before he vanished into the Midwest. The case had been settled out of court, buried under a mountain of hush money and an airtight NDA.
But the patterns were identical. The chance meetings, the targeted seduction of women in high-stress corporate roles, and the slow,
methodical siphoning of their liquid assets into joint ventures that Eric controlled. Sarah thought she was the architect of this new life.
She thought she was being clever, moving our house money into Evergreen Solutions to start over with the man of her dreams. In reality, she was just the latest mark.
She hadn't just invited a home wrecker into our marriage. She had opened the vault for a wolf and handed him the combination. He doesn't love her, Matt, Elena said, her voice unusually soft. He's just waiting for the Evergreen account to hit a certain number before he hits the delete key on her life.
2. Looking at Eric's smug face in the Seattle court records, a chill settled behind my ribs. My anger toward Sarah didn't vanish, but it shifted.
She had betrayed me, yes.
But in her arrogance, She had put our entire future and her own safety into the hands of a man who made a living out of leaving women hollow. The house wasn't just falling down. It was being looted by a professional. I chose the location a quiet corner bistro in Lincoln Park. It was the same place where, 6 years ago, I'd hidden a ring box in a plate of blueberry pancakes and asked her to build a life with me.
It was a sentimental choice, but not for the reasons she thought.
I wanted to see the beginning and the end in the same frame. Sarah arrived 10 minutes early. She looked diminished.
The aspen glow was gone, replaced by the sallow skin of someone who hadn't slept in a week. No designer wrap, no power suit, just a woman who had realized too late
that the man she traded me for was already looking for his next exit strategy now that her bank accounts were frozen. "Matt," she whispered, her voice cracking.
"I know I don't deserve a second of your time." I didn't offer her a seat. She just took one.
For 20 minutes, she tried to explain the unexplainable. She talked about feeling trapped, about Eric's vision, and about how she thought she could have it all. I just watched her, realizing that the woman I'd loved wasn't sitting across from me.
That woman was a ghost I'd been chasing for years.
This was just the stranger who had occupied her skin. Finally, she looked at me with eyes rimmed in red. Will you ever be able to forgive me?"
I looked at the table, then back at her. "I already did, Sarah," I said. "And for the first time. I meant it. But I didn't do it for you.
I did it so I wouldn't have to carry the weight of you around anymore. Forgiveness isn't about giving you a clean slate. It's about me refusing to be your anchor." I stood up. I didn't wait for her to cry. I didn't wait for the apologies that were really just requests for help. I walked out into the crisp Chicago air, leaving the bill and the memories on the table. I got into my SUV and started the engine.
As I pulled onto Lakeshore Drive, the skyline opened out before me, a jagged, beautiful grid of steel and glass.
My marriage was dead.
My savings were tied up in litigation.
My house was a crime scene of the heart.
My life as I knew it was gone, but as I drove toward the light of the city, I realized I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, I wasn't squinting through a fog of lies.
The foundation was gone, but the view was finally, hauntingly crystal clear. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. What do you think about this story? Let me know in the comments.